Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. There you go. There's the button that makes everything go. I hope that it just didn't click back on and that we weren't just broadcasting background information and discussion around the house. I don't think so. But anyway, good morning, everybody. How are you doing? How is your button working? Is everything okay? The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live. We know this much, according to the buttons that I've pressed on my computer machine that tells me where the Twitter news is. Bill tells me the show is live now, and to enhance the enjoyment of this broadcast, Kagro X, me, David Waldman, will do his best to refrain from mentioning toadstools during the program, unless in a purely botanical context. It could be botanical when we get around to it. Of course, you're going to have to know at this point, although, honestly, I haven't seen much chatter about it, though I haven't really been looking in the right corners of the internet, but more of the various explosive tell-all books are being excerpted. I think the Woodward and Costa book is out already now. So I think the time has come to an end for exclusive excerpts, pre-release excerpts, because, we're post-release now. But, still doing the media tour and astonishing everybody with the various things that they uncovered that, really should have brought the Trump administration down, uncovered 2, 3, 4 years ago, and revealed for profit now. But whatever. I guess we're glad to know. In the meantime, similarly, the next, I guess, sort of semi-faux hero in all of this, was a terrible person until recently. What's her name? Stephanie Grisham, right? The former, I guess one of the last press secretaries or communications, I don't know what label she had, press secretary at the White House, the Trump White House, but blah, 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 saw the light January 6th. Oh, yeah, well, now I'm going to resign. And now publishing her tell-all book, which I suspect she was planning to publish whether January 6th happened or not. And now we all have to decide, is she a lunatic, a fabulist, a disgruntled ex-employee, some or all of the above? Not really sure. But let's see. The latest round of teaser stories, the Buy My Book stuff, has included in it, let's see. Oh, Trump had a terrible temper. I had to protect young female employees from him because he was a predator, and I liked him up until he set his sights, his predations on Capitol Hill. But before that, I was perfectly comfortable with it. And gosh, now I'm not, because insurrection, which, that'll change your mind about a bunch of things. Anyway, but included in it, well, I don't know. I should just get right to it, I guess. But I don't want to spend any real time reading it, because Greg's coming and the real news is coming after this. But let's see. For instance, there's the report from Mediaite. And by the way, that reminds me, there's another thing in here from Maggie Haberman that I have to remind myself of. What was that one? Yes, a different thing. But another excerpt from her book. But Stephanie Grisham, in the headline here in Mediaite, Stephanie Grisham claims Trump once called her to explain his penis was not small or toadstool-shaped, which I guess was the claim from Stormy Daniels, although I thought she said mushroom and not toadstool, but I assume pretty much the same shape, I guess. I don't know. I guess I could look it up, but my impression of it was all pretty much the same. Okay, well, he says it's not that, so there's your answer. It is that, and that's all you really need to know about that. Although there was the interesting addition to the story, just to make it a little bit more ridiculous, is that she received this call. He called her from Air Force One to tell her this. So I don't know whether that, by the way, that might cost extra to the government. I don't know what sort of, technology and costs are involved. But apparently this was important enough that before I land, I need Stephanie Grisham to know that my penis isn't small or toadstool shaped. We've got to rebut the porn star, and quick. So, all right, that's what was on his mind. In the meantime, yeah, there was the other story about, and I think it's included in this one, that she apparently took on the task of protecting this younger female employee from Trump's predations. The Washington Post, in excerpting this and reported on it, it's included in this Mediaite bit. Grisham alleges that Trump became obsessed with a young female press aide whose name isn't in the book. The president constantly asked where the aide was during, During, I don't know, dinner. Oh, there we go. I got blocked for a second. Got to pop up. During press events, Grisham wrote, and allegedly once requested that she be brought to his cabin on Air Force One so he could look at her, and it's bracketed here, and they've substituted in the word behind. This is the quote, look at her behind. So that wasn't obviously what Donald Trump was going to say when he wants to look, bring her. I want to see her rear end, her behind. So we imagine what he may have said. Trump behaved inappropriately with Grisham, too, she writes, calling her from Air Force One to assure her all of the penis stuff was in order. And Grisham wrote that Trump once asked her then boyfriend, a fellow Trump aide, if she was good in bed. What an appropriate question. But, he's a filthy predator, and we know that, and it's not changing any minds. So, on to the news, where we're also, in many cases, not changing minds, but we're thinking a lot more about how to do that. Like, we don't care about changing Trump's mind about being a predator. That's not happening. But what about people getting the vaccine? Some people might start getting it. And the news is that there are people saying, I give up. I'm going to go get the vaccine. So that's good. Any of that in the news today, Craig? Good morning.
Hi. It's always in the news. I should mention, since you brought up Stephanie Grisham,
okay, all right,
that Omarosa won her, and Trump lost his case to enforce the non-disclosure agreement, otherwise known as an NDA. And so if it turns out that you can't really enforce these NDAs, in fact, you might see even more tell-all stuff.
That would be
whether
great.
It's in that book or some other book. But if you can't enforce them, then, why shouldn't they talk?
I have no idea. I mean, I imagine Stephanie Grisham's going to get a bunch of money, and other people will say, I'll take some.
Yeah. Well, people do a lot of things for money.
Right. Well,
like,
I hope they do this.
Kristen Sinema.
Yeah. How much money is she getting?
I don't know, but she had a great meeting with the lobbyists who don't want to see anything go forward.
Okay. Well, they should turn around.
Oh, she also had a meeting with the White House, but it's not so clear how that went.
No money involved.
The pundit roundup today is entitled The House Sitch Moves, but not necessarily forward.
Cool. Okay.
And, I think that there's some background stuff that I think is well worth emphasizing.
Bring that aide in. I want to see her background.
Yeah. For example, Pete Schroeder tweeted the other day, I'm a broken record here, but whatever's happening on Capitol Hill right now is functionally incomprehensible to anybody whose full-time job isn't paying attention to it. And I pointed out, well, even if it is your full-time job.
Okay.
So Massachusetts news reporter Adam Bass answered, well, I think it's also time to start asking if the people who are in the job of Capitol Hill themselves know what's happening. I bet you President Biden turned to Ron Klain and said, Ron, what the F is going on?
Yeah.
And I said, well, and Klain turned to Schumer and said, and Adam Bass said, well, to which Schumer turned to Pelosi and said, what the F is going on? But the background here that people need to get is all of this is happening because of the filibuster.
That is true.
What occurred is that the Democrats had a platform.
What occurred? Yes.
Right? They have a platform. They'd like to do this. They'd like to do that. They were elected on doing this. Even if it wasn't the reason they were elected, nonetheless, they have a platform. Okay, fine. So if you have a platform, chances are not everybody in the party is going to be unanimous for that platform, whatever it is, whether it's on drug pricing, whether it's on immigration, You could probably get a majority for every single thing, which is how it wound up in the platform.
Yeah.
But if you put it all together, that doesn't necessarily translate to a majority because people have this objection or that objection, some stronger than others. But with the filibuster, you can't break it apart and do everything separately. Because each one of the separate things, may or may not pass on its own because the filibuster would stop it. There's a lot of stuff Democrats would do, except they can't because of the filibuster. So the only way to deal with that is to put it all together. And since you only get one shot, you got to put it all into reconciliation, at least as much as you can. Hope it passes the bird bath, which is the no, that's not germane rule. And by the way, everybody should note the parliamentarian is out for a couple of weeks dealing with some health issues.
Yes, I heard that. They have assistants. Don't worry.
Yeah. No, as far as the mechanisms of what happens on the Hill, that's not an issue. But,
but her personally.
Hopefully for her, she does okay. In any case,
the doctors have
you have to put it all in reconciliation in order to get it through because of the filibuster. And that therefore makes it difficult because with so few votes, you now have that group of people who don't necessarily agree on everything having to push the Democratic platform. And you just don't have any leeway for getting it through. Now, it turns out, no matter what you see in terms of this person, that person, I object, I don't object, this, that, anything else, the House isn't the problem. The problem remains the Senate. And it's not so much the Senate as a whole. Of course, it's 2 Democratic senators, and one more than the other. And the one more than the other isn't Manchin, it's Sinema. So Sinema had 3 meetings at the White House yesterday, and part of the problem is that it's unclear what she wants. The White House doesn't know what she wants. It's unclear she knows what she wants.
Yeah, that's a problem.
And so it's very hard to negotiate. In fact, here's the Politico story on that. Though Sinema reiterated to Biden she's still not ready to support the bill, one of the people familiar with White House thinking said some progress was made overall on Tuesday and that the meetings with Sinema were productive. The White House advisor characterized the president's meeting with Manchin as productive, covering climate change, other aspects of the package involving families. And that's all good. All right. And I think everybody in the House gets that this has to be done. But the problem that progressives are having with the moderates in the House are all based on the fact that the moderates don't want to walk the plank for a bill that may not pass the Senate, and nobody knows what it's going to take to get it to pass the Senate. And that's why everything looks the way it does. And so most people don't really care. Yeah. Right? They're not really interested in the day-to-day. This one's up, this one's down, this one's mad yesterday. Okay, they're not mad today. They're making nice today, but they're not going to make nice. Nobody cares about that. They want to know whether the thing is going to pass or not. Now, the bilateral infrastructure bill is slated to be voted on tomorrow. There will be some Republican votes, yes. Nobody knows how many. There will be some progressive votes, no. Nobody is sure how many. And so the practical question that the Democrats are dealing with is, look, if we can't get agreement on reconciliation, and Sinema never is going to agree to reconciliation, then reconciliation will fail because you need Sinema's vote. And if it's going to fail, why should we pass the infrastructure bill, which is good but not great, when it's going to stall everything else? That's what the progressives are thinking. Okay. And the moderates are thinking you have to pass this because you have to pass whatever you can get. Take the W and just move on. And I go back to the original observation. If you don't follow this full time, and even if you do, it's really unclear what's going on. So Democrats are always nervous. And even before wins, they always feel like they've lost. Even after wins, they always feel like they've lost. So it's really hard to gauge what's going on just based on feeling vibes. Because Democrats are always losing when it comes to vibes. That's just the way they are. Yeah. Republicans are always confident they're going to win even when they lose. And Democrats are always unconfident even after they've won. So you can't go by that. And you can't go by counting votes because nobody knows what the actual proposal is yet. And so that's why it's very confusing and not helping anything.
Dang.
And that doesn't tell you where you're going to go.
No.
Because it often this is one of those darkest hour before it turns pitch black situations. It often looks like this right before a deal's made, but we don't know what kind of deal's up there. That's separate from the debt and continuance of government stuff. And the problem with the debt and continuation, raising the debt limit and making sure the government doesn't shut down, is I'm a little bit more confident that the White House and Pelosi and even Schumer at least have some sort of plan, and that Sinema and Manchin basically want the attention. James Bowie wrote this morning in News with Burgess Everett. During a private meeting with the president, Sinema made clear she's still not on board with the party's $3.5 trillion social spending plan and is hesitant to engage in some specifics until infrastructure passes. And Jamel Bowie wrote, well, the funny thing about Sinema refuses to put up a number is that a week before, Axios had a piece about how Sinema was deep in the weeds, plugging numbers into her spreadsheet.
Right. And
right. And Josh Marshall points out it's really comical. She has zero engagement with the policy details at all, and from all accounts, very little knowledge. And Jamel Bowie says, I've come to the conclusion she's just a total narcissist who lives off of flattery and attention. And it's the flattery and attention from Republicans and Chamber of Commerce types, which is the biggest influence. And if that's the case, then, it's just impossible to predict where it's going to go. But I think the eyes have to be on Sinema and Manchin, as they have been. And don't worry about the infighting in the House. That'll sort itself out if things get under control in the Senate. And that's a big if.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess I would, the only thing I would tell the House, whatever they want to call themselves, not progressives, is maybe some of them know this, maybe some of them don't. They haven't been around for a very long time, most of them. It's always a question mark what the Senate is going to pass. And if you say, I won't pass anything until I know it's going to be passed in the Senate, then you're asking for the Senate to pass their bill first. And that's a different request. And it's actually quite akin to what the progressive ask is. You got to pass this thing. Otherwise, I don't know that you're going to get around to it in the form that I like. And it's just not a thing that you can do. You can't always say, the Senate goes first. Because the Senate will just say, send us what you send us. And very often, they don't pass what the House passes. That's just commonly the case. So the idea of hanging your hat on this one bill saying, I won't stick my neck out until I know what they're going to pass. Well, you know how to find out how they're going to pass? Send them some papers, pass something, and see what goes on.
Send it over, and then you'll see.
Yeah, sorry, it's part of the job. Well, I don't want to take any risks. Well, then you should have stayed home and run that small business out of your garage, like you said you were doing before.
Right. So the good news is, if that's in fact the case, and I think it is, and I think you're right, then it's not necessarily true that all of this is doomed. Because we just don't know. It's certainly not also true that don't worry about it. It's all going to come together. We don't know that either. Yeah. We absolutely don't know how this is going to go.
And a lot of members, they do know this, and they for whatever reason, at the moment, that is something that I'm waiting to see what the Senate passes, or I won't vote for something that can't pass the Senate, is something that reporters will write down and then leave, saying, I've got an answer. So they just, that just worked for Joe. I'm going to say that.
Right. So, the good news, if you want to take any good news out of what's going on here, is that you're still not hearing a whole lot from Sinema and Manchin publicly. And, my theory about how Congress works is that since 90% of what they do is save face and 10% of what they do is try to figure out what their job is, 8% of that is getting reelected. And the other 2% is actually getting policy passed. And the reason they are so into saving face is they figure that's the best way to get elected. So when you're hearing about stuff publicly, it's not going well. And when you're not hearing about stuff, that's because they're actually negotiating privately. And I'm not hearing a lot from Sinema, so, I take some encouragement from that.
I guess that could be the case. There's also, I just happened to notice the other day, observation from Twitter folk that you might also follow along. John Walker, tweeting at John Walker, Jon Walker, DC, who made the observation that he's been, he's conducting his own research, but he really is. He's reading through Joe Manchin's legislative history. And as much as people like to bash him and Sinema for holding things up, he came to the conclusion that, well, I've taken a look through his legislative history, and he really does appear to have serious interests in certain sectors of infrastructure investment, and he really would want to see those things. So you can get some idea from his previous work what sorts of things he would be interested in seeing included both in an infrastructure bill and even in reconciliation. Not necessarily the case with Sinema, so that's different. It sounds like he's giving him the benefit of the doubt in many of these things. However, he did also point out a lot of the stuff that he really would prioritize won't be in this infrastructure bill and can't be passed in anything but reconciliation. So he's going to have to get off the, off his
and
rear
why?
end,
Because filibuster. So you get back to that. It all
right.
comes
Thank
down
you.
to that.
Okay, let's do it that way. All right. True. And I told you how to get rid of that. Does anybody want to do it?
Some decades ago, yes. Activists who helped elect Kirsten Sinema launched CrowdPAC to fund a primary challenger, say so long.
Okay.
Organizers say if Sinema doesn't vote to end filibuster and back Biden, they'll replace her with somebody who will. Not so simple, of course. One of the other sub-themes that's been running through the past week is the concept that somehow or other you can shame Mitch McConnell into doing the right thing on the debt limit and shutting the government down, which I think after the Merrick Garland Supreme Court stuff, it's pretty clear that no, there's no shame. The thing that makes Trump is there's zero shame.
Yeah.
When you're a total narcissist, you just don't have it. The Bowie comment about Sinema being a narcissist is relevant in the sense that, not that it must be true because he said it, but because if she has some narcissistic tendencies, it also makes no shame part of the deal. So you can't shame her into voting the way you want. And you can't make Manchin vote the way you want by shaming him because he's from West Virginia, and West Virginia is not a, let's say, progressive stronghold. It's just not. It's Trump country.
Well,
and he's the only Democrat that can win. He knows that you know it, and everybody else knows it, and he makes sure everybody else knows it. So, the idea that you can force them into doing what you want to do was, and will always be crazy. That's not how it's going to work. You're going to have to cajole them. You can't force them. Suck it up. Get used to it.
All right. Well, I'm certainly used to it. It's very depressing, but I'm used to it.
It is depressing. I mean, it's not good, but, that's reality. And so, the idea that, well, if we just do these things, we can put pressure on. You can't put pressure on them. How are you going to put pressure on them? They always have the recourse. So if you don't like it, I'll go independent or maybe, switch parties.
Yeah, I mean.
How much pressure you want to put?
I don't know.
And what do you think it's going to do?
I'm not sure, although there are certainly times where things get to the point where there's pressure in the other direction, too. There's certainly situations in which we may say, all right, do it.
See how far you get. If they're basically with you, you can work with them.
Right,
and that's
if
where
they are.
Manchin comes in. And that's why Sinema being such an enigma is so difficult for people who are trying to get the yes and trying to make a deal. Okay, well, what do you want? Well, I'm not telling you.
Yeah. Well, it might be something you could do if there was a track record that people could then say, well, either I still can't figure out what he wants, but he's generally with us. And then there's Sinema, which is, there's no generally anything. She's not has no track record. She comes from nowhere and has no legislative record behind her. She could just flip and leave. So, yeah, I'm not going to have any patience with that. I won't be giving her the benefit of the doubt. All right, Arizona's lost. What's next? That's not good for her reelection campaign.
Right. So this Business Insider is one of the very few media pieces that gets the situation right with the economy. Mitch McConnell, Senate GOP votes for the U.S. to default on its debt and for the government to shut down. Very straightforward. No both sides about it. That's how everybody should cover it. They don't.
Just everybody do that.
Yeah,
it's true. It's
take
correct.
advice.
There's really no other way of doing it. But
And extending a theme
Somehow.
in terms of the media, because again, I don't think there's a whole lot more to say about what's going on in Congress with the twin Biden bills, because we don't know. We're going to have to wait till tomorrow when it's on the floor or not on the floor, and have more to say about it. And even tomorrow morning's show, I don't think we're going to know yet. But there's a very interesting piece from Dan Kennedy that's in GBH News. Why our crisis of democracy is suddenly having its moment in the media spotlight.
Oh.
From the Washington Post to Politico, from Philadelphia Inquirer to Boston Globe, from CNN to public radios on the media, the conversation for the past week has revolved around the likelihood that Trump will run for president in 2024 and the very real possibility that Republican functionaries at the state level and in Congress will reinstall him in the White House regardless of how the election goes. And perhaps the most chilling, of course, was Robert Kagan's piece in the Washington Post, 5,800-word essay. The U.S. is heading into its greatest political and constitutional crisis since the Civil War, with a reasonable chance over the next 3 to 4 years of incidents of mass violence, breakdown of federal authority, et cetera, et cetera. And then Kennedy goes on to cite all the other places, from reliable sources to Woodward and Costa's new book that you started with, and says actually that book is part of the reason, because that's where the John Eastman memo comes from.
Yes.
And secondly, the results of the fraudulent Arizona audit, which is not stopping other audits in different states, puts into relief how seriously they don't take any facts. And thirdly, Rick Hasen, who's been having actual conferences and media appearances about how bad things are from an electoral point of view. So those three things coming together made it the topic of the week, and hopefully it continues because it's an important topic.
Yes, there's plenty more about it. Lots of people talking about it and raising awareness, even if it's scary as hell.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I've got an item to read into the record that might help us figure things out, just in terms of, all right, well, what will I hope for? By the way, perfectly valid to say, I don't have to predict anything. I don't have to hope for anything. I can just sit and watch at this point. It's all right. Yeah. So Greg Sargent has been very interested in what's going on and helping or trying to work out, well, what should be the strategy in all of this? Like, as you said on our way out, it's unclear whether we, should you be rooting for, whether you're progressive or centrist or whatever. Do you root for, well, let's just pass the infrastructure thing and take what's out there on the table and call it a win? Or is it more important long term to say, look, when you make a deal, you got to stick to it, and you got to show, part of the game up here on Capitol Hill is showing the people you negotiate with that you're a dependable negotiation partner. And part of the reason that we're having this problem is that people have in the past demonstrated the opposite, that they're not good negotiating partners, and that they'll make a supposed deal, I'll pass this bill and you, in exchange for you passing that bill, and then getting their bill passed and then walking away, which is why progressives put themselves in this position and said, well, we'll only pass this pretty decent, okay-ish maybe bill if you actually help us with a bill that's very important. So, is the deal's a deal approach more important? So Greg Sargent was circulating this. A big misconception out there is that the hard infrastructure bill is, quote, good politics for vulnerable Dems. That'd be like swing district Democrats. And the social policy bill, reconciliation, is bad politics for them. So Katie Porter, who he notes here is a frontliner herself, which means, of course, new member of Congress in a swing-ish district. But Katie Porter, has built a reputation in a short amount of time for being pretty level-headed and straightforward in her approach to things. A frontliner herself makes a strong case against such thinking here, and he puts it in his Washington Post column. But the excerpt reads, so this all points to another big irony here. If this process implodes, the Democrats who represent swing districts may well suffer most. Passing a broad popular agenda may not stop Republicans from picking up seats in the 2022 midterms, but if Democrats don't pass that agenda, they may well get swamped in a wave election. I'm not certain that a red wave election is going to materialize, but okay. Anyway, so who loses in a wave election if it does materialize? Not the progressives, he says, who represent safe Democratic districts. It's the ones representing swing districts, often called the frontliners. Now, Representative Katie Porter, of course a Democrat from California, understands this well, in his opinion. She is both a member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and a frontliner in a swing Orange County district. Porter told us that vulnerable frontliners, too, have a great deal to gain substantively and politically from passing a robust reconciliation bill. Porter noted that many provisions in the infrastructure package are long-range projects that won't even be underway by the midterms. All you'll have is a paper in hand that says in 2027 they're going to build this overpass, in other words. By contrast, many provisions in the reconciliation bill will have an immediate impact, such as expanded Medicare eligibility and home care services and assistance for child care. Those are things that will immediately begin to improve the lives of Americans and will begin to immediately improve our economy, Porter told us. Democratic members, regardless of your district's composition, this is what voters want. Porter said many frontliners are adamant that we cannot fail and that we need to deliver the president's entire agenda. Porter also told us she will vote against the infrastructure bill Thursday if there's not a framework and an agreement on how we move forward. It's increasingly likely that if the infrastructure bill is to pass, it will only be if the two main Senate Democratic centrists can reassure progressives in some way by agreeing to a reconciliation framework that isn't too whittled down and by demonstrating a durable commitment to it. We need Manchin and Sinema to tell us what they're comfortable with, Porter told us. So that's the end of the excerpt. But it makes a great point that, you've just sort of come to understand or believe or accept when you're told that, oh, well, it's the infrastructure bill will deliver at least some results that frontliners can run on. Except what it's going to deliver is a headline that says a contract will be signed after this next term is over, and they'll start building in the next term after that, but please vote for me now, as opposed to I helped you get child care next week.
And your credits are in your mailbox.
Yeah. So that's a good point and probably ought to be made and probably is being made inside caucus discussions, but needs to be made more often in the newspapers so that people who thought the other thing was true find out there's a real reason for reconciliation to pass after all.
Well, again, that all depends upon the idea that public pressure works. Yes. And in this Congress, in this particular moment, I'm just no longer convinced that it does.
Yeah, it's possible. With these two nudniks, I'll tell you. All right. It's possible.
Anyway, still more, because the other big story remains, as we were just saying, I was just saying, is democracy on a knife's edge. way that the press handles things is also remarkably continuing to be under discussion. And I like that it's under discussion because it needs to be. This is a Twitter thread by Mark Jacob that I have in ThreadReader.
All right, Mark.
For those of you who don't like to read it. And he says, I used to edit page one stories for the Chicago Tribune. So he puts his creds right up front, including many from Washington. In this thread, I explained why the media, including me, have been unintentionally complicit in the rise of fascism that threatens our democracy.
Oh,
that got my attention.
yes. Why, Mark?
Mainstream media has long tried to treat Republicans and Democrats equally. Some, like me, thought that was the way to be fair. In fact, it was the way to be lazy and not sort out the facts. Just quote a Democrat, quote a Republican, you're done. Yeah. When I edited political stories, I went so far as to count the quotes from Republicans and Democrats, thinking an equal number would make us fairer. I didn't think I was helping either party. I thought I was helping the readers, and I was wrong. If you look back 3 or 4 decades, you see many corrupt politicians in both parties. Abscam, Keating 5, those were mostly Democratic. Well, at the time, if you had mostly Democrats in power, that would be the case.
Right.
I mean, let me contrast that with, South Dakota, where Republicans are in power.
Yes.
Right? South Dakota's Attorney General is reviewing Governor Kristi Noem's controversial family meeting, which prompted allegations of abuse of power among state lawmakers because she wanted something for her adult daughter. And as Allison Carter points out, the Attorney General, who killed a man with his car, will investigate the governor for using her power to chastise a state agency for being mean to her adult daughter.
Yes.
South Dakota having a normal one. So absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Although those two are at one another's throats, by the way, so that might be a good investigation.
Well, we'll see how that works.
Yeah.
But getting back to this, Abscam, Keating 5 Democratic problems.
Yes.
I think John McCain is mixed up in Keating 5, if I'm not mistaken, but I don't remember anything anymore.
We should all be so corrupt.
But in recent decades, it's obvious the GOP is more unethical and anti-democratic, which means treating the parties equally helps Republicans. Hillary Clinton's mishandled emails, George W. Bush lied to get us into war. Both were bad. One was way worse. The media's self-assigned job to treat Republicans and Democrats equally has compelled them to pump up coverage of Democratic scandals because it's fairness signaling. The Republicans have overwhelmed the media with corruption. They've created scandal fatigue, prompting journalists to do something I call ethics norming. That's when something that would have been a huge scandal in the recent past is considered normal now. And so you just have Republicans shrugging about January 6th, my example.
Okay.
The Republicans have pulled off quite a trick. If news is defined as something unusual happening, GOP corruption is not news because the party is so widely corrupt. Some media have turned off their outrage impulse and decided that corruption is normal. What's needed is new framing, not party-oriented, but democracy-oriented, truth-oriented. The media shouldn't elevate liars in the interest of fairness. Yes, media should be fair to the readers, to the facts, but not to the two-party system, to our democracy. We're now in the midst of an assault unlike any our country has ever seen. Any journalist who doesn't frame their reports in that context is doing the grievous disservice to our country. And again, look at that Business Insider. It's not about democracy, but it's about the truth. McConnell is blocking the U.S. from resolving the debt issue.
Yeah.
Plain and simple.
Yeah.
That's what's going on. No two sides about it.
That's
okay, so
true.
2 other things which I think are of interest in that regard. One is The Guardian reporting this morning that Trump plans to sue Biden to block the release of White House records to the January 6th committee,
Yeah, right.
potentially touching off an extended legal battle. He aims to run out the clock. Basically, he's saying, I have executive privilege, and Biden says, I don't think we're going to support that. You're not president anymore.
Right.
So we'll see how that goes. And then a related story, January 6th trials slowed by mounting evidence in U.S. Capitol riot. In the nearly 9 months since January 6th, federal agents have tracked down and arrested more than 600 people. And you're not hearing about how these cases are now going to prosecution, partly because there's so much evidence that it takes a while to process it all.
Yes.
Link it together, see whether there are conspiracy laws that are broken, et cetera, et cetera. And so, we're looking at January, a year after this happened, before some of this stuff starts coming to trial. So if you're seeing not a lot of news about, well, what happened to all those people who are participating and the ones who were arrested, what's going on with that? The news isn't because it's not happening. The news is it's delayed because there is so much happening.
Yeah, well, when there's a large volume of evidence, that will happen, and these gears always have turned slowly. The only real news has been there have been some people that they've been able to short circuit the process by saying, "Well, I'll tell you what, this is the mountain of evidence that we have against you. Would you like to plead guilty and save us the time?" And some people, I guess, in reviewing it, say, "Yep, when that's read into a court record, I will be convicted." So there's been a couple of plea deals at least, but yeah, I'm waiting for the big sentences. But I don't even know whether we're ever going to get those or not. But yeah, true. At least there is a mountain of evidence, and I hope that they'll sort it out.
Right. Getting a little bit closer to home, did you happen to watch or catch any of the Virginia governor debate yesterday?
Nope, just the Twitter chatter that, boy, Glenn Youngkin is really bad at debating.
Yeah, that's the impression I got, but you never know. It's because who you follow.
Right.
I'm sure if I followed,
for sure.
right-wingers, they'd say, well, Youngkin destroyed
awesome.
McAuliffe in that debate because, everybody destroys everybody.
Or audit the debate. I'm not sure which one they would be pulling for, but yeah.
Right. So Youngkin has had a problem with waffling, although he finally came down afterwards to correct the record on the side of, I would have voted to certify Biden on January 6th. Then he was asked about vaccines, and he's not for vaccine mandates. And so Chuck Todd, who for some reason was moderating the debate, asked him about measles, mumps, polio, and other things. Yeah. And Youngkin didn't have a very good answer and waffled on that too.
Oh. Well, do you happen to know what it was?
Well, if you can't mandate the one, why should you be mandating the other?
Well, right, but I don't know. Well, that's a good question, but I'm wondering, was his waffle, well, then we won't mandate them, or I guess, or was it, well, I'll mandate those, but not this one? I'm not certain which is the worst answer.
Right. Let's see.
It won't really matter.
Let's take a U.S. News look at this. McAuliffe Youngkin hold fiery debate on vaccinations and taxes.
Okay.
Let's see. What does he say?
That's
candidates maintain the positions they've consistently outlined in vaccine mandates. McAuliffe supports and Youngkin doesn't. He wants employers to fire employees who didn't get the vaccine, said Youngkin, who's vaccinated and says he believes everybody should get it.
Yeah.
Chuck Todd pressed Youngkin on whether he believed getting vaccinated for measles, mumps, or rubella is a personal choice. Youngkin struggled to find his words for several seconds and then said, I think the data associated with these vaccines is something we should absolutely understand the difference. And when he asked again, he said, well, he thinks those vaccines can be mandatory.
All right.
And so, data, just him struggling with answering. And so why is COVID different? Well, because, look over there.
Yeah.
I'm better on taxes.
I think, I guess what he's trying to do is hang his hat on the shorter track record of collection of data on the COVID vaccine because it was just invented, which, is the sort of thing that makes vaccine deniers or the vaccine hesitant nod their heads. Oh, yeah. It's too rushed. It's not for various reasons, but yeah, okay. All right, so
I saw one poll that said like 60% of Virginians are just fine with mandates. So McAuliffe has the more popular position, but
that's good.
Whether these debates, whether they do anything or not, remains to be seen.
They didn't do anything for me, so I don't know. Yeah, we'll see. It's a traditional thing. You have a debate, blah blah blah. All right, they did it. But we're in the middle of a pandemic, and one guy
here's CNN's version. The candidates split on vaccines. McAuliffe would require them for students, teachers, and healthcare workers.
Sure. And
would support businesses that impose mandates. Youngkin says he encourages everybody to be vaccinated, but opposes mandates has emerged as a central issue. He's going to send a child to a school where a teacher's not wearing a mask and a teacher's not vaccinated. That's disqualifying to be governor, McAuliffe said.
Yeah.
Youngkin, meanwhile, maintained McAuliffe's characterization of his stance as the most egregious untruth. Okay. So
but it's right.
McAuliffe said, you shouldn't be governor if that's what you think. And Youngkin says, you're lying about my position, the Robert Dole position. So we know how that goes. That's why they thought that Youngkin didn't come across as winning that debate.
Yeah. Well, right. You're lying about my position. All right. But is this your position?
Yes, it is.
All right, then. Yeah. So that sounds like.
Right. Youngkin stumbled when asked whether he believes that the required vaccine for measles, mumps, and rubella should be also a personal choice for Virginians. He said the data associated with these vaccines is something we should absolutely understand the difference. Pressed again, Youngkin said the vaccines can be mandatory. I think the COVID vaccine is the one that everybody should get, but we shouldn't mandate it.
Right. Well, so, then what do you want to be governor
again,
for?
Skipping McAuliffe pressed him on Trump's endorsement, and that's going to be an issue as well. Interestingly here, McAuliffe distanced himself from his national party at one point. Asked if he supports the $3.5 trillion budget reconciliation package. He said, well, the figure's probably too high. But he did urge Congress to approve the bipartisan infrastructure package. And the reason I mention that is not that McAuliffe is a political genius, but if that's what he thinks plays, he's a politician with his finger to the wind. So, it's just of interest.
I guess so. I don't know if that was the call, but that's what he did. So, okay. He's got wiggle room if Youngkin is that bad at the debate.
Right. Okay.
That's it. I don't care about anything else.
That's it for me. It's Wednesday. I'm going.
All right. Yeah. So is all.
Basically, that's all I got. But I'm trying to say this professionally.
Yeah. All right.
All right. I'm done. I'm out of here. Sorry. On you now. Bye.
What happened? All right. Well, I can accept that. That's a fine thing. It was all the stuff is ready for your sanitation engineers. You don't need to. Because we could listen to you gather up the trash at the end.
No, it's all ready. I'm just waiting for Abby to greet him.
All right. Well, we all are too, so we could just sit and wait. But all right, that's fine. I think why not have an extra cup of coffee? Take a break. Put your feet up. That's fine. Thanks,
Sarah
Greg.
Ferris is a reporter for Politico, and of note to me because she's from my hometown in Newtown.
Oh.
Ferris Farms has the absolute best ice cream in the world.
Oh.
At Whip's meeting this morning, Pelosi is not holding back about the group of mods threatening to tank debt limit vote today. She basically told members she's had enough.
Oh.
She's had enough going on before this. Fact check, true.
All right. Where's this one?
So it just came over. This is from Sarah Ferris. I'll send it over to you as a tweet.
I was thinking about the ice cream.
But
I'm not certain
what she's doing, for some reason, they want to pass a clean debt limit bill today, and for some reason they don't have complete Democratic support for a clean bill. I don't understand why.
Well,
that one poses me. I don't get that. Just do the damn thing.
The moderate group, or the so-called moderate group, is the one. I could see maybe where, I don't know, maybe progressives might say, no, put it as an element of a must-pass bill, and let's hang some other stuff on it.
She wants a complete unity, 100% on the continuing resolution for government funding.
And there's people.
And for some reason, it's not there yet, and I don't get it.
Yeah. Well, there's no more about it. It's just reported. So all right, Whips me. So I guess if you want to know more, keep following Sarah Ferris.
Sarah Ferris and Scott Wong.
Scott Wong, okay.
Scott Wong, D.C.
Watching this stuff, and only one of them will be able to get you, potentially free ice cream.
Right.
But,
thanks
the news
to
is good for both of them.
Luckily, they're not in a skiff, because I guess what's happening is they're tweeting and DMing all the stuff that's happening during the caucus meeting to the reporters. Scott Wong reports, House Democrat in caucus meeting this AM. I've never seen Pelosi more impassioned as she demanded unity on the continuing resolution for government funding, essentially shaming those who might take it down. Shaming doesn't work on Republicans and the Senate, but it might work in the House.
Yeah, and I imagine that the shaming that's going on is we have just spent a week, maybe more, in unified messaging, and we've been knocking ourselves out for by the way, in the leadership, pointing out that the government is either about to shut down or the debt ceiling is about to be hit, and it threatens the entire economy and the world economy with it because they're playing stupid games. And, if you, aren't playing stupid games, let's see you fix it. Okay, so here's the fix. And now I have people playing stupid games. I just set this up to be a huge contrast between us and Republicans, and that only idiot Republicans would dare play political games with the debt ceiling. And the first thing you did as a Democrat is say, I'd like to play some games with the debt ceiling. So I could see her being furious just about that. And saying, look, so the shaming here is, I just did all the campaign work for you. and you want to blow it up for what? I would love to know, what is it that you think you need so that Democrats can pass the debt ceiling increase that they just spent the week saying absolutely no questions had to be passed, and only Republicans would be foolish enough to stand in the way. What is it? Tell me, please. I would love to know, because I will shame you with that, and that might be enough to say, I just thought.
And there you have it. And that'll just have to work for now, and we'll come back and we'll do more tomorrow.
All right, Sarah Ferris and Scott Wong, who may or may not be, he could start an ice cream business at any moment. So I guess it's not fair to rule him out on that. But okay, thank you, Greg. Come back tomorrow?
Oh yeah, we'll do that.
All right, good. We'll do that, and we'll see, because tomorrow's supposed to be the first of the votes. In all likelihood, nothing will be happening on the floor while we are on the air. They'll be working
it's too early for
more.
That. The action happens later, but
yep.
We'll be back for more cooperative interruption, whatever the fancy term is for it.
Oh yes, right. Come up with a better, more interesting term. Did that was it the same author that you told me? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, Deborah Tannen.
All right. Yeah.
Whose name I now know, I recognize right away. Oh, right. That's Deborah Tannen talking about language and linguistics.
Right. Best lemonade in Newtown. She runs the stand. I don't know.
All righty. Take care.
Very good. Thanks. See you tomorrow. And let's move on to some of the other items that we have in store for you, or that we're waiting in the wings, or that popped up during the last few minutes. If you want to take more tally of where are our favorite pundit types, Josh Marshall has his answer of what to do strategically. Kill the bill, he says in the editor's blog at TPM, a piece he illustrates with a file photo of Kyrsten Sinema in one of her ridiculous wigs. And it's okay to ridicule those wigs. I think she wanted us to ridicule those wigs. It's just a bit of whimsy, and it has nothing to do with the substance beneath the wig, so don't worry about it. Anyway, this is what he has to say, fresh this morning, from a little bit about an hour and a half ago. Members of Congress have begun to say explicitly in the last couple days what I think has been clear for weeks and months. Kyrsten Sinema's multiple trips to the White House yesterday just confirms it. The multiple trips confirm it, but it has an S. So, she's not negotiating about any of this in good faith. Joe Manchin is a huge obstacle for Democrats pushing their agenda, but the Manchin problem is still very different from the Sinema problem. I had a conversation yesterday similar to a number I've had over recent days. A business lobbyist explaining that, yes, they want the infrastructure bill real bad, and that their optimal scenario is that the infrastructure bill passes and the reconciliation bill goes down to defeat entirely. This is a big business lobbyist, remember. A separate irony is that most of these people, the ones who appear to have Sinema's ear, seem entirely unable to grasp the implications for the Democratic Party if that is indeed the final outcome. It will rip the Democratic coalition apart. It certainly could. Of course, in general, that's not their concern or their problem, but it certainly means all the self-styled moderates, and that's in scare quotes, all the self-styled moderates they're working with now will, I guess is likely anyway, will go down to defeat, both because of primaries, but also just as the natural consequence of a Democratic rout. More business-friendly Democrats in blue seats will also get replaced by more progressive members. That could happen. I am consistently surprised how people whose whole job is politics, supposedly, seem to have so little grasp of its basic functions. But then, so am I. And I don't know if this is a grasp of it or not. But anyway, this is his argument. In any case, if you're going to lose, it is important to lose well rather than poorly. I guess you could ask Marjorie Margolis-Mezvinsky about that. Doing so is actually a key way to actually win. But to win, you have to be ready to lose well. That is to say, I guess you win policy-wise, win for the country, not necessarily win your district again. But that's how you lose well, I guess. Losing well is far better than losing poorly. Back in 2000, but I think he's talking about losing well on legislation. So let's let him continue here. Back in 2004 and 2005, President Bush tried to partially abolish Social Security. There was huge pressure on Democrats to negotiate, to put up a counterproposal, to get involved in the process and limit the damage. At the time, Republicans had unified control of the federal government. They could do the thing if they wanted to. Democrats finally settled on the right approach, which was no negotiations, no support, no nothing. Democrats couldn't control the outcome, but they could clarify what was happening. Democrats support Social Security. Republicans want to abolish it. In the event, Bush's plan collapsed. Democrats were ready to lose well, and that helped them win. But it's worth thinking through the alternative scenario. What if Bush had, in fact, abolished most of Social Security? That would have been a policy disaster for hundreds of millions of Americans. La la la. But if the Democrats had been part of it, if the Democrats had been part of it, it would have been disastrous for them as a party. The cases are very different, but there are some similarities to now. If the upshot of the Biden presidency is that Democrats delivered the votes for Kyrsten Sinema's infrastructure bill vanity project and got nothing else, it will be profoundly self-discrediting for the Democratic Party, in addition to being a disaster for the climate future and much else. Democrats and the White House need to be ready to kill the infrastructure bill. That's his advice. It is perverse and bizarre, since the Democrats, though tenuously, now have unified control of the government rather than being a beleaguered opposition with no holds on any levers of power. How we've gotten to the point that they cannot collectively control the outcome, well, that's crazy. And we know how it's happened, but that's where we are, largely because of Kyrsten Sinema. But look at what we're talking about here. Is the reward for her betrayal having the party she is betraying passing her infrastructure bill? That's too crazy to allow to happen. It is a basic element of life for individuals that we must strive to confront with dignity things we cannot control. It shapes who we are, and something similar applies to political coalitions and parties. Well, there's another paragraph here. Can I squeeze it in the next 5 seconds? No, absolutely not. Shall we try after 1 minute? Maybe. We'll see. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Let's see if we can continue to put this thread together in our heads here. There's a little bit more from Josh Marshall, and I think, I don't know, he's a good writer, so you would think he'd really wind up and finally deliver the pitch in this last paragraph. So let's try it. We left off in saying, how have we gotten to the point that they cannot collectively control the outcome? Well, that's crazy, but that's where we are, largely because of Kyrsten Sinema. But look at what we're talking about here. Is the reward for her betrayal having the party she is betraying, and now she's saying, I might go independent, right? Is the reward going to be, well, let's pass your infrastructure bill? It certainly shouldn't be. And as he says here, it's a basic element of life for individuals that we must strive to confront with dignity things we cannot control. It shapes who we are, and something similar applies to political coalitions and parties. That's not a very good conclusion, so there must be more. Now, there are potentially lots of ways to skin this cat. Poor cat. Maybe the House passes the bill, but Speaker Pelosi declines to send it to the president until there's movement on the reconciliation bill. That old trick, right? Maybe. And I think early this morning, people were saying, I don't know whether it was Josh or someone else saying, what if she sends it to the president even after some delay, and the president takes the opportunity to delay a little bit and doesn't sign it right away? But of course, I guess that only really gives him about 10 days, and that really might not be enough by itself. However, if they say we're about 2 days away from getting an answer on this reconciliation bill, yeah, he could hold it and sign it later. That's a possibility. Of course, perhaps a little more likely is that Pelosi could hold on to it for a little while, et cetera, et cetera. But let's see what he has to say here. Right. Pelosi could decline to send it to the president until there's movement on reconciliation, or the president would hold it for a week himself. As has been the case throughout this maddening year, there are just too many factors that aren't visible to us. Democrats will have to rely on Nancy Pelosi and others to make good decisions based on knowledge of details they cannot share. That's true. But to the extent we can be clear on goals, to the extent we must shape transitory tactics with a clear understanding of where we want to end up, a final outcome that is an infrastructure bill and nothing else is just not tenable. It leaves too many critical priorities unaddressed, especially climate, and makes a mockery of the whole Democratic coalition. If it's the BIF and nothing else, kill the BIF. Well, that's a good point, and made from a climate advocate's perspective, I guess, here, and that's what he kept calling out anyway. True, it would be rather ridiculous for most Democrats, moderates too, to go back to their districts having said climate, 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 and then having done nothing regarding climate. All right, adding to the growing background here, in case you were getting worried or nervous or angry about the so-called moderates and all of this, Josh Gottheimer is speaking, and there's a clip here. I don't know. He's being interviewed on some local TV show or another. The Hill sending around this video clip, and the quote with Josh G saying the rather, I think, reassuring thing: "We're going to get both done. It just doesn't make any sense to me that you have a faction of folks in my party that would blow up the president's agenda, refuse to vote on infrastructure as some sort of way of to hold up progress." Interesting. So at the beginning, I thought it was a more conciliatory approach. We're going to get both done. Like, oh, okay, good. As opposed to hearing from the moderates, well, I don't really care about the reconciliation bill. But then, of course, he turns around to take a shot at the progressives anyway. It doesn't make any sense to me that you have folks in my party that would blow up the president's agenda. And by the way, another good point being made, the president's agenda, the Biden agenda, isn't a couple of bridges that start in 6 years. The Biden agenda is embodied in the reconciliation bill in the main. It would be nice to also have an infrastructure bill, but for which of the two presidents, the two most recent presidents, was infrastructure week a constant thing? It never delivered, but it was Trump. I mean, do we have infrastructure needs? Yes. Would it be good to get them taken care of? Yeah. Was that the Biden agenda? Nah, it really wasn't. So it's interesting how both factions, rather than both sides, both factions tend to use the Biden agenda and talk about different things. But yeah, I'd be interested to see, how does Josh Gottheimer reconcile this? We're going to get both done. It doesn't make sense that one side would blow up or refuse to vote on infrastructure. Now, would they refuse to vote for the infrastructure bill if they were assured by moderates that we are going to get both done? No, they wouldn't. So the key to not having that infrastructure bill blow up is in the hands of people like Josh Gottheimer, who should just say, we're going to get both done, and shut up. That would probably have been a better statement on that front. Let's see. Other things I wanted to add to this. I happened to see a comment fly by here. Let's see. Can we pick it up? Yes. Twitter friend Hillzoy, who says, this looks like this is going to turn into a thread. Does it? Yes, it does. I just was interested in this first tweet here. Every so often, when some Democrats are being recalcitrant, people say things like, why don't Pelosi and or Schumer just knock some heads and get them in line? I've never understood exactly how this is supposed to work. This is true. How long does this thread go on? A couple of tweets. Leadership can strip them of committee assignments, but that only works when the recalcitrant members actually care about getting stuff done. Doesn't seem to be working, say, for Marjorie Trader Greene, and I suspect it won't work for Sinema. Leadership can cut them off from the entire Democratic fundraising operation. This is serious. If leadership has anything embarrassing on them, they can threaten to make it public, but in Sinema's case, I suspect personal peccadillos are already priced in with the pink hair. I have been wondering about this for years. I plan to watch what happens to Sinema going forward, since, if anything, will reveal what it looks like when leadership decides to exercise its power. This is it. This does not apply to Manchin. In his case, switching parties might well be a winning move politically, but Sinema, I plan to watch with popcorn. I don't know whether we'll ever see anything at all, or if anything happens, whether we'll see what happens with Sinema. I don't think it'll be quite as dramatic, but it actually brought to mind something else that we were discussing a few minutes ago, which is, it's interesting. I mean, I guess people have different ideas about what does it mean to knock heads together and get people in line. Because the thing I was talking about, much lower level thing, but that's the knocking heads that leaders can do and getting people in line, having the caucus meeting and having moderate House Democrats show up and say, I'm gonna trip up the debt ceiling bill, hold it up for some hostage. And how do you get that done? It never rises to the level of you're going to lose your committee seat, because it gets resolved right then and there. Knocking heads together and saying, listen, this whole thing, we've been working, our fingers to the bone for 2 weeks, setting up this vote as pure good versus evil, pure Republican versus Democrat. This simply has to get done or we're all going to suffer. And they, nonetheless, are willing to play games. And now I have you playing games. We cannot have this. And that, shouting match ends up with people saying, all right. And, just don't name names in the paper and I will turn around and do the right thing. But on the other hand, a vote like that is probably something that you would find yourself in trouble over. And they would probably say that the speaker could certainly say, listen, this is a I don't know, it's not a scored vote, but this is a leadership vote. That's what they use. And we'll be taking your position and how loudmouthed you are about it on a vote like this into account for everything. Do you get onto the front line list? Do you get onto the red to blue list? Do you get onto the various do I show up for a fundraiser? Do I put my name on a fundraising invitation for you? Do you get that committee assignment you want? Do you lose a committee assignment that you have now that you no longer deserve? Will I, in 6 years from now, when you want to be in the leadership of your committee or move up in the whip organization, will you do it? And sometimes the revenge for these things comes slow, and it's mentioned that it could, this will linger for a long, long time. Don't screw around with this. All right. Well, there we go. I think I was going to say, I'm not certain I put that thread that I read aside for you. Now you can read the Hillzoy thread for yourself later on, although I've just read it to you. What more do you want? But I don't know. That's the practice. We like to set these things aside and let you read them for yourself. All right. What else did I put aside for reading to you? I found the John Walker quote. But I don't think that, well, it was a funny little tweet, so maybe I'll read it to you. But I mentioned to you that this was about him having looked into Joe Manchin's background and decided, Manchin really does have some legislative priorities. There's some things you could understand about Joe Manchin. Not the case with Kyrsten Sinema. And he puts it this way. Me, who read all of Manchin's bills going back 5 years, he really cares about what's in his infrastructure, and the GOP in power won't do it, right? He's got real priorities about infrastructure, and he should keep in mind that Republicans, were they the majority, would simply deny him all of it. They might, that might change if he were to switch parties, it's possible. But generally speaking, the kinds of infrastructure investments Joe Manchin wants to make are not the kind that the Republicans are willing to invest in, even if he was a Republican. And he may, if he's willing to change his views on what party am I in, I guess, possible that he may also come to change his views about what sort of infrastructure he backs. But the real point was he's done all this reading about him for his last 5 years worth of legislation. And he discovers, he really does have some interests and things that he's been consistently trying to pursue. Versus pundits just now, that would be yesterday, pundits saying, no, Manchin is only a senator for the lulz. A new, more pro-Trump 2023 House is going to give Biden big wins anyway. Well, that doesn't seem like a really smart thing to conclude as a pundit, but I don't know, and I'm not certain what motivated that part of it. But, yeah, that's a good point. Like, maybe Manchin actually has left behind a track record of what he's about. And it doesn't seem very pundit-y to come to the conclusion that anybody, much less, one particular senator, but that anybody would say, I'll go through all the trouble of running for and winning a seat in the Senate just for the lulz. Like, I don't really want anything in particular. However, it may be the case that Kyrsten Sinema has done that, and we'll have to puzzle that one out in the future. All right, let's see. Other things to read up on. Everyone should go read about Stephanie Grisham's book because Trump penis is in it, and that's funny. Maggie Haberman, I mentioned, had something tweeting around yesterday, and look, I put it away, so it must be a reason for it. What the hell was it? Oh, yes, right, another item from the Grisham book. From the Katie Rogers write-up in the New York Times of the Grisham book, the final answer, the whole article is attached here. I don't know, maybe we ought to look at it. Trump penis in it, that's funny. But anyway, what she grabs out of it, the final answer to the mystery Walter Reed trip for Trump when he was president. Remember that there was, didn't he say something like, I'm going for the first half of my physical or something like that? Was his explanation for it at the time. So Grisham claims to know what was actually up. And I'm not certain whether this is real or what, but this is what's claimed. The mystery Walter Reed trip was not about Trump having a secret heart ailment or some other deep health secret, although this one turns out to be a pretty deep health secret. It says, the claim is, he was getting a colonoscopy, which, you're supposed to get, and decided not to get sedated, which is an interesting choice to make for a colonoscopy. And I saw some doctors on Twitter say, by the way, no, that's not actually a choice you can make. I'm a doctor and I perform colonoscopies. And if a patient says I won't take sedation for it, it's like, well, the colonoscopy's not happening. I don't know. By the way, if you pass on the sedation for a colonoscopy, to me, you're foolish. I mean, unless you have some problem or allergy with the sedation, I don't think I sleep better than that. That's like the most restful nap. I understand there's some things going on, but I don't know about them. And look, they have to get done anyway, so what the hell? Get a good nap out of it. The tough part of the colonoscopy is prepping for it. No one likes that. But the sedation, that's probably the best part. If there's any redeeming quality, that and finding out that you don't have, colon cancer, that's big. That's the reason you get the things. Nobody does it for eating the chicken broth or anything, but honestly, if you're talking to somebody who's nervous about getting their first colonoscopy, it's all worth it for that nap you get under general anesthesia. Well, anyway, Grisham claims that Trump refused it, and that raises a number of questions. One, can that really happen? Two, what was that like if it really can happen? And three, why would you fight against getting sedated, of all things? Now, which also, by the way, another question arises. Why would you leave a big mystery about this thing when it's something as routine as a colonoscopy? Which, for a normal person, if you said, well, I'm getting a colonoscopy, everyone would say, oh, I understand that. That is not a big deal. I have no more questions about your visit to the doctor, and I have no doubts whatsoever about the fact that you'll be returning to work tomorrow. And it's a good thing. Plus, of course, there's, I'm getting a colonoscopy. I'm the President of the United States. This is an important thing. I'm taking time out to do it because it's important. You should all do it. Everybody should do it. There's no reason not to. It can save your life. But then again, vaccine, and he's doing nothing, right? And people are eating horse paste, and he wants to inject them with bleach. On the other hand, he doesn't want to stick light bulbs up their butts. So this is a common thread, too. But anyway, this is the problem. Donald Trump, I think, I'm guessing, but I would bet, maybe the excerpt will tell us some more, that he is the kind of person who says, I don't want anybody to know I'm doing that. They're going to think I'm a wimp, which I don't even know what that is supposed to mean. I'm taking care of my health. Well, but I wonder if he thinks like people are going to think it's gay or something because but. Well, there's a whole lot more to that whole thing than you're giving anybody credit for, and it's awfully, let's say, idiotic and disgusting for you to focus on something like that. But there are such people, and they're idiots, and one of them got elected president, and that's problematic all by itself. But I think that's going on. But the other issue is the idea of not getting sedated. I'm curious. Remember, if you will, what happens when a president gets sedated or is, put under general anesthesia for any reason. There's the old 25th Amendment. Now, we've come to think of the 25th Amendment as the, oh my God, Trump is crazy, let's get rid of him amendment. But there's other parts to it. And when the president is, sedated or otherwise incapable of performing the duties of the presidency, then there's a process for this. And the vice president kind of takes over and is acting president during the time of incapacity. And then when that time of incapacity passes and you have a normal president, the vice president says, yep, I hereby declare, or I certify, or I don't know whether he signs anything or presses any buttons or pushes back the head of a bust in the office and presses the red button and goes in the Pence cave or whatever it is. But he hands the ball back. All right, the president's okay now. I'm no longer acting president. Well, the president being Donald Trump, there's some question mark here about, okay, so Mr. Vice President, will you now certify that the president is fit for office and you'll hand the powers of the presidency back to him? When you put it like that. And I wonder whether Trump feared that and actually said, I'm not going under sedation. Well, Mr. President, I don't know if you understand this. Colonoscopy really can't be performed without sedation. I don't care. I'm the president of the United States and I demand. All right. I don't know. I don't know whether they really did it. Curious to find out, but I don't know if the New York Times will clear it up any. And I don't know how much time I really want to spend on this. But there's the piece. You can search it yourself. Stephanie Grisham's book details Trump's terrifying temper. Trump's terrifying temper. The former press secretary is reflective in her tell-all and says, I should have spoken up more. By the way, I thought the same thing about an hour ago, maybe more, when Greg was reading us the Thread Reader collection from Mark Jacob. Glad to have the information, but once again, his story basically was, well, I used to edit the page one stories for the Chicago Tribune, and for all the years I did it, I effed it up and I played the both sides game, and now I'm telling you, you were right the whole time to think that I was wrong the whole time, and I'm no longer the editor of the Chicago Tribune, I guess, and so I can't fix that. But the point is, now you'll know that I feel like I was wrong the whole time. But I'd rather know than not. Anyway, I don't know what Stephanie Grisham has to say about this stuff. I'm kind of curious to see if we can get down. Is there more about the colonoscopy? I gotta have more colonoscopy, as the SNL sketch did not say. But I'm just curious. I mean, there's all kinds of things in here about how terrible he is, and it's worth reading. And we might come back to it if I might look at the news and say, the rest of the stuff is boring. I want to find out how terrible he is. I don't see it immediately, but you know where to go, and I'll give you the link if you want to find out what the F happened around Trump's colonoscopy. All right. Other stuff important to share. There's lots of it. Better get to it. Let me jump into this one from Politico, because it's time. There's still time to scare the crap out of you. I mentioned this when Greg brought the subject up. There's lots more writing on it. More scare the crap out of you stories about what if the authoritarianism and election stealing proclivities get worse later. Now is pretty bad. But, Politico magazine publishes an interview with Rick Hasen, whose name we call all the time from the articles here. What if 2020 was just a rehearsal? It's been a theory that a lot of people have shared. American democracy, the subheader says, is in the midst of a waking nightmare, says Rick Hasen, and Democrats aren't taking it seriously enough. A common complaint. Zach Stanton is the interviewer, so he'll be the one when the bold lettering asking the questions is being read aloud. Rick Hasen isn't getting much sleep these days. One of the nation's foremost... He should get a colonoscopy, by the way. One of the nation's foremost experts on the laws that hold together democracy in America, Hasen, used to be concerned about highly speculative election nightmare scenarios. The electrical grid being hacked on Election Day, or the pandemic warping turnout, or absentee ballots totally overwhelming the Postal Service. But now what keeps him up at night aren't fanciful what-if exercises. It's what has actually happened over that past 9 months and how it could truly blow up the next presidential election. For the first time in American history, the losing candidate refused to concede the election, and rather than dismissing him as a sore loser, as the Republicans did last time, when there even was a concession, a startling number of Americans have followed Donald Trump down his conspiratorial rabbit hole. The safeguards that ensured he left office last January after losing the presidential election may be crumbling. The election officials who certified the counts may no longer be in place next time he falsely claims victory. If Republicans take Congress, a compliant speaker could easily decide it's simply not in his interest to let the party's leader lose. You could look at 2020 as the nadir of American democratic processes, or you could look at it as a dress rehearsal, says Hasen, a professor of law at UC Irvine. To understand this fragile moment for American democracy, you could take a 30,000-foot view of a nation at the doorstep of a constitutional crisis, as Robert Kagan recently did for the Washington Post, and Greg told us about it. Or you could simply look around you at what's happening at the ground level, in broad daylight, visible to the naked eye, as Hasen has been doing. As he sees it, it's time for us all to wake up. I feel like a climate scientist warning about the Earth going up another 1.5 degrees, Hasen told Politico magazine in an interview this week. The rhetoric is so overheated that I think it provides the basis for millions of people to accept an actual stolen election as payback for the falsely claimed earlier stolen election. People are going to be more willing to cheat if they think they've been cheated out of their just desserts. That's a good point. Hasen has ideas about how to preempt some of this. They range from the legal to the political, and they're the subject of a major conference that took place Friday at the Fair Elections and Free Speech Center, which he co-directs at UC Irvine. But even as he and other election experts warn of a 3-alarm fire, he's troubled that Democrats in Washington seem to lack the same sense of urgency and focus. I think this should be the number one priority, and I thought that Democrats wasted months on the For the People Act, he said. The Democrats' answer is, well, the Democrats just have to win elections. There needs to be a plan B to that. If the same state and local elections officials are in place in 2024 as in 2020, many of them Republican, Hasen is confident they would be able to stand up to Trump's pressure to disregard the vote count and declare him the winner. But Hasen isn't confident that they will be in place. Many elections officials are fleeing, and he says, being replaced by people who do not have allegiance to the integrity of the process. We got a taste of that this week when Texas announced a, quote, audit of the 2020 election results in 4 counties some 8.5 hours after Trump publicly called for one, despite no serious evidence of any problems. Or consider how things might have played out in January if Congress's makeup had been different. What would have happened if the election was exactly the same, except Kevin McCarthy was Speaker of the House? I don't know that we'd have a President Biden right now. What realistically can be done to secure American democracy at this fragile moment? Politico magazine spoke to Hasen. They transcripted the exchange, and here it is. Condensed and edited, of course, for length and readability, by which I mean they're going to make it very long, and we're not going to finish it. Certainly not before our next break, which is coming in about a minute. But when we spoke 17 months ago, our writer asks, you outlined a nightmare scenario for the 2020 election. The pandemic would disenfranchise huge numbers of Americans. The voting processes would be overwhelmed by absentee ballots. Trump would declare victory based on early returns. He did do that. And once the absentees were counted and Biden was the victor, he'd claim fraud. That happened. I got the sense that that nightmare now is much worse. How did 2020 alter the way you think through all of this? Well, he doesn't just say, I was right, and leave it at that. I don't know, but he has more to say. In September of 2020, I wrote a piece for Slate titled, I've never been more scared about American democracy than I am right now. And I think we read that piece. A month ago, I was on CNN and I said I was scared, well, crapless. Did he say that on CNN? I'll have to check it out. The anchor badgered me into saying those words on cable TV. Interesting. But I'm even more frightened now than in those past months because of the revelations that continue to come to light about the concerted effort of Trump to try to alter the election outcome. We'll continue with this and the fact that he's scared crapless and his colonoscopy next.
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Shall we continue in reading with this Rick Hazen interview? We just started on the interview part. And he reminded us that, yeah, he was the author of that September piece in Slate. I've never been more scared about American democracy than I am right now. I'm pretty sure I saw that one. And, yeah, I'm pretty sure that that piece and a couple of others, perhaps building on the same work, pretty clearly predicted at least the broad outlines of how Trump would react to the election results and how he would claim victory and then claim fraud when the victory disappeared as absentee ballots got counted. But anyway, let me get back to his answers here. He was saying, I'm even more frightened now than in those past months because of the revelations that have continued to come to light about the concerted effort of Trump to try to alter the election outcome. Over 30 contacts with governors, state legislative officials, those who canvassed the votes, pressuring governors, pressuring secretaries of state, having his lawyers pass out talking points to have Mike Pence declare Trump the winner even though he lost the election, the Eastman memo. I mean, this is not what we expect in a democracy. And by the way, update, something we didn't mention, but I think you probably saw in the news over the weekend. Trump had a rally down in Georgia over the weekend, one of the old campaign style rallies. And, where he gives his speech and blah, blah, blah. And, some of it is, some of it's standard stump speech. Some of it is new made up crap. But during his speech, he sort of casually mentions in bashing Brian Kemp, the Republican governor of Georgia, who we don't like, but who I guess stood in his way, along with Brad Raffensperger, stood in the way of his plan to simply declare himself the winner of Georgia. I think he thought that he really could control that, and I think he thought that because George W. Bush controlled the Florida outcome, right? You just call your Republican allies and get it done. I mean, it's one thing to call your brother versus calling a random Republican governor, but, whatever. Anyway, I think he just thought that was a sort of thing that a president could get done. And I think there was evidence of that in the transcript of his call with Raffensperger, just basically saying, you better do it. You better be careful. If you don't do it, you could find yourself facing serious federal charges. He really sincerely believed that he could leverage the presidency into forcing the DOJ to charge Raffensperger with a federal crime of some kind. Not necessarily the crime, by the way, of not listening to him and doing what he wanted, but that I think the implication was clear that we could drum something up on you and just say you're a pedophile and arrest you for that. That wasn't entirely clear, but I think that that's something Trump thinks is in his bag of tricks. Anyway, so over the weekend, it turns out we all know the Brad Raffensperger story, and we heard the call, but Trump just casually drops that he also called Brian Kemp, which I don't think was ever established as fact and certainly never admitted to before. And it might be that, it didn't happen and he's just making it up because he wanted to bash Brian Kemp. But, that also means that's just bad news generally for Republicans, that this guy would go around making up stories like that and faux confessing them, or actually spilling the beans on himself. Now we got to find out. And I think that that it reminds me that over the weekend there was also some controversy about something that crazy Sidney Powell did an interview with a crazy podcast or something like that. Also over the weekend, also making some claims about the nature of the Eastman memo and the plan that was hatched around it. And that, I guess the claim was that the January 6th insurrection had many aims, and that among them, I'm sure they were hoping, maybe they'll just surrender and declare Donald Trump king for life. But short of that, they were looking to at least, if not reverse, delay the completion of the electoral vote count and delay the declaration of Joe Biden as the winner of that electoral vote count. And that if they could delay it and Congress was scared away or whatever and couldn't reconvene, I guess the part that they didn't count on was having the House or the joint session reconvene and finish the count that night. They were allegedly, according to Sidney Powell, hoping that they would stay adjourned and that they could make an emergency application to the Supreme Court to stay the process somehow and open it up for, whatever wild claims they were going to try to make to try to get things somehow, somewhere along the line reversed. That part is not clear, but the claim was that Justice Alito was standing by with the understanding that they would bring him this emergency application and he would shepherd this thing through, which I don't know whether that comports with real process or not. And lots of people jumped in to say, just by way of warning here, before you get too wrapped up in this, it is Sidney Powell saying this, and she's crazy and a fabulist. So there might not be any substance to it. But it was a weird weekend for unnecessary confessions to criminal wrongdoing by two major figures. Could all be made up in the end, but it's something you would want to ask some questions about. All right, now we flip back to this because Rick Hazen had brought up, over 30 contacts with governors, state legislative officials, and those who canvass the votes, pressuring them to just say a different number, basically. In 2020, there was a massive shift to absentee balloting. True, might not be necessarily the same here, but a lot of states found that their results were happy results, not just, even the states, of course, that went for Trump. They just basically said this worked pretty well. People kind of liked it. So in one state that didn't go for Trump, California, they're saying, I think we may move to all mail voting, or that is all mail-in voting. Not that we're disenfranchising the women. That's not what we mean. We're keeping the 19th Amendment. In 2020, massive shift to absentee balloting. Donald Trump did denigrate absentee balloting despite using it himself and despite having his own ballot harvested for the primary. Interesting, right? He lost the election but claimed he actually won. He made hundreds of false statements calling the election results into question. He's convinced millions of people that the election has been stolen from him. And he is continuing to not only push the lie that the election was stolen, but also to cause changes in both elected officials and election officials that will make it easier for him to potentially manipulate the election outcome unfairly next time. This is the danger of election subversion. The reason I'm so scared is because you could look at 2020 as the nadir of American democratic processes, or you could look at it as a dress rehearsal. And I'm afraid that with all these people being put in place, when you've got Josh Mandel in the Senate, if you get him, from Ohio, and not Rob Portman, I'm really worried. This also is not news, but reinforcement of our worry too. But for that reason, I'm willing to continue. Let's dig into that, says our interviewer. Traditionally, we talk about voter suppression, but what you're describing is this whole other thing. Not suppression, but subversion. Can you walk through that difference? I think we all know it, but sure. So, he says, Georgia recently passed a new voting law. One of the things that law does is make it a crime to give water to people waiting in a long line to vote, unless you're an election official, in which case you can direct people to water. That's voter suppression. That will deter some people who are stuck in a long line from voting. Election subversion is not about making it harder for people to vote, but about manipulating the outcome of the election so that the loser is declared the winner or put in power. It's the kind of thing I never expected we would worry about in the United States. I never thought that in this country, at this point in our democracy, we would worry about the fairness of the actual vote counting. But we have to worry about that now. Given the shift from suppression to subversion, he's asked, do you think the purpose of claims of voter fraud changed during the Trump era? Sure. In 2 books of mine, I argue that the main purpose of voter fraud arguments among Republicans was twofold. One was to fundraise and to get the Republican base excited about Democrats stealing elections, or about the idea that they were anyway, and the other was to delegitimize Democratic victories as somehow illegitimate. In 2020, things shifted. The rhetoric is so overheated that I think it provides the basis for millions of people to accept an actual stolen election as payback for the falsely claimed earlier stolen election. People are going to be more willing to cheat if they think they've been cheated out of their just desserts. This was already previewed. Maybe we just should have read the summary of the thing. This is kind of annoying that I now read the whole thing and I'm not getting new stuff. Anyway, and if you believe Trump really won, then you might take whatever steps are necessary to assure that he is not cheated the next time, even if that means cheating yourself. That's really the new danger that this new wave of voter fraud claims presents. Question. So, at the risk of sounding flippant, when it comes to Trump's claims of voter fraud, we should take them seriously but not literally? Well, I would never take them literally because they are false claims, but we should take his undermining of the election process extremely seriously. Words really matter here. Next question. That seems a little tricky. There's such a wide range of things that have come from Trump-adjacent figures since the election, including very serious real-world proposals like the Texas voter law, as well as incredibly outlandish claims like those from Mike Lindell or the Italygate conspiracy theory. Do we have to take even those seriously, or is there a way to taxonomize these things, to focus on those that are most meaningful in terms of shaping the possibility of election subversion? I don't know if that's a good question. But the answer is good. I don't think we should look at any of these things in isolation. You look at Italygate and you laugh. How ridiculous to think Italian satellites being used to change American election results. Or you look at the Trump tweet where he claimed fraud in a bunch of Democratic cities populated by African Americans, like Milwaukee and Philadelphia, both Democratic cities in swing states. You take any of these things in isolation and say, oh, there's no proof of that. That's just cheap talk and it doesn't really matter. But if you look at the sum total of everything, what you see is a denigration in public confidence in the election process. One of the things I found stunning as I was writing this paper was that in a recent poll, more Republicans than Democrats, 57% compared to 49%, believe that election officials in the near future will steal election results. Republicans are more worried about election subversion than Democrats, whereas there's no indication of any Democrats plotting like Trump was plotting to try to overturn the results of a democratically conducted election. The cumulative effect of these kinds of claims on what millions of people believe is tremendously damaging, and it's hard to see how we get out from under this when no amount of facts could make a difference. Running a clean election is necessary to prevent claims of fraud from going out of control, but it's apparently not sufficient. That, I think, is something I really miscalculated in thinking about the dangers of 2020, and I wrote a whole book about the dangers of coming. I wrote a whole book about the dangers coming in 2020. I thought if we could hold a fair and clean election, there'd be nothing to point to say, look at all this fraud, and therefore any such claims would evaporate. What I didn't understand was that you don't even need a kernel of truth if you're going to blatantly lie about a stolen election. I mean, if we just saw this New York Times report that when Trump-allied lawyers like Sidney Powell were making claims of voting machine irregularities causing problems with vote counts, the Trump campaign already knew that those claims were bogus, and yet they made them anyway. Truth didn't matter at all. In your new paper, you write that the solutions to these problems are both legal and political. Is the law alone not enough? The law is only as powerful as people's willingness to abide by it. If you put people in power who don't follow the law, then the law is not constraining. We also need political action to bulk up the norms that assure we have fair counting. And here I would interrupt, I guess, and say, yeah, sometimes there are people who say they aren't willing to abrogate the law, but are still willing to cheat. They just want to see the law changed to make it easier for them to do with a clear conscience. Like, the state legislature hereby says that the Secretary of State can overrule the local elections officials if he suspects that there's been fraud. And that the legislature further reserves the right to recall that power, to strip that power from the hands of the Secretary of State and make that determination for itself. And, it's not, well, you've broken the law because the answer to who won the election is there were 10 votes for candidate A and 5 votes for candidate B. And the law requires that you say that and that candidate A win because he got the most votes. And you said the opposite. However, if it says, well, if you're willing to sign a paper that says you suspect that there was something wrong with the election and are claiming the right to overrule the local officials as a result, then when you say that candidate B won, even though the first count was that candidate B lost 10-5, well, we think the counting was done wrong. And in the way we count, which we don't really have to tell you what it is, by the way, is that it was 5-4 for candidate B. And I'm signing the paper, and the law says I can do this, so I'm not breaking the law. And that's part of what makes some of the Texas and Georgia laws so scary, is that they just basically say, well, you now have the authority to say numbers don't really matter. It's up to you, especially when it comes to stuff like, well, we think the election was handled irregularly for some reason. And so although we can't really get around the fact that candidate A won the election in this state and is entitled to the electoral votes of this state, we can, however, say something irregular feeling happened. The law says we can say this. And so we award the electoral votes to candidate B. And I haven't even broken the law. So it's not even necessarily a matter of people who are willing to break the law. They're willing to change the law such that there's hardly any way to break it. So anyway, the legal changes, he continues here, that I advocate for fighting all this run the gamut. Things like ensuring we have paper ballots that can be recounted by hand, conducting official risk-limiting audits to check the validity of a vote count. None of this applies to any of that stuff that I was complaining about. But removing the power of those who play essentially a ceremonial role in affirming election results, making sure that there are streamlined processes for bringing bona fide challenges in elections that are actually problematic. Congress also needs to change the rules for how it counts electoral votes. That's true, too. Rules that date back to an 1887 law called the Electoral Count Act that's both unclear and subject to manipulation, as we saw from recent memos that leaked in connection with the Woodward and Costa book. There are a lot of legal changes we could make, but people need to be organized for political action as well, because if you're not willing to abide by the rules, then those rules alone are not going to stop someone from stealing an election. That's a concrete target, it says. Do you feel the Electoral Count Act has received enough attention? No. I don't think any of this has gotten enough attention. I think this should be the number one priority, and I thought that Democrats wasted months on the For the People Act when they should have started by looking at this unprecedented January 6th insurrection and what led here and what could be done on a bipartisan basis, nothing, by the way, to try to make it much harder to subvert election outcomes. Earlier this year, President Biden gave a speech in Philadelphia where he described the assault on voting rights as the most serious threat to American democracy since the Civil War. But if he believes that, it's odd that he wouldn't take higher priority. It wouldn't take higher priority than, say, bipartisan infrastructure bill, which, important as it may be, isn't an existential question about democracy in America. Do you think Democrats are mishandling this? That's the question. I feel like a climate scientist, right? Again, he said this before, or warning about it going up another degree and a half, or an epidemiologist. This is new. Warning about what's going to happen if we don't take measures to control a new pandemic spreading. I think Democrats should have done something differently earlier. I'm heartened now that a part of the Freedom to Vote Act includes provisions against subversion, though I'd like to see more provisions in there addressed to subversion. And I think Democrats need to blow up the filibuster, if necessary, to get these things passed. Hello. Before they run a serious risk of losing power in 2020 and having someone like Kevin McCarthy in charge of counting the Electoral College votes. Well, he wouldn't be, but, even if he's the Speaker of the House, he's not in charge of that. That goes to the President of the Senate, but whatever. Having someone like him counting it, and when he didn't stand up to Trump after January 6th, if you control the House during the counting of electoral votes, you can make Kevin McCarthy president, at least temporarily. It's a real danger, and, the Democrats' answer, at least the statements that are in the news media, is, well, the Democrats just have to win elections. There needs to be a plan B to that. I don't know that they would make Kevin McCarthy president, and I guess, does he mean through the process where the states vote as states if there's no electoral vote winner? Maybe. Let's see, a couple more questions and answers here. Might as well finish it up because there's no time to change directions. Even though I do feel like this is just sort of confirming stuff we've worried about all along, but maybe it's making some of these things more explicit. It strikes me as a difficult situation. If pro-democracy legislation is seen as passed in a partisan manner, then it's easier to write off as partisan. Do you see a way around that? Because that would seem to have dire consequences if democracy itself is seen as inherently partisan exercise. I have my own answer to that one, but I'd love to see what his is. The way to have avoided it would have been to go to Mitch McConnell, and if he said no, go to Mitt Romney and Lisa Murkowski and Liz Cheney and say, sit with me and draft up a bill that would counter election subversion. That wouldn't convince all Republicans, but it would have gone a long way. There was a moment, go back and look at the speech that McConnell gave after the insurrection and the condemnation of Trump. Trump has only strengthened his hand, and any Republican who might try to suggest legislation that would make it harder to steal elections is going to be attacked by Trump. Already, Mitch McConnell is being attacked by Trump, and he let him get so much of his agenda through. That moment passed, but there was that moment. So yes, it's a danger, but what's the alternative? Doing nothing? By the way, my own answer to wouldn't it be easy to write it off as partisan is everyone will forget. Don't worry about it. If it's on the books, it's on the books. And by the time it's becomes necessary to exercise it, you can say, that's what the law says. A few people will remember, well, sure it was, but it was passed in partisan fashion. Yes, but it was passed. Because how do I know that this is, that other people are making the calculation that it would work that way? Because that's what they're doing in Texas and Georgia. They're saying, yes, we're passing these things in partisan fashion. It doesn't stop them. And their plan is to say in 2022, 2024, whenever, well, I'm just following the law. Brad Raffensperger, you might find, I'm still betting that you'll find out that he's a rat. And a Republican rat at that. And if he's asked to change the outcome of the results and is empowered by law, ostensibly, to do so, then he will. It's not about, well, I refuse to change the outcomes. It's about, I will only follow the law. If you tailor the law such that I can do what you want without breaking it, I will do it. That's the problem. And their calculation is when that happens, there isn't going to be anybody in the streets saying, the law, they followed it, but it was passed in a partisan fashion. You see, it should never have been that way. It's going to be people clubbing each other over the head. Well, there was that procedural. At that point, procedural won't matter anymore for settling issues on the street anyway. All right, one or two more questions here. Some Republicans note that large numbers of Democrats believe that George W. Bush was illegitimately elected. A Gallup poll from July 2001 even showed something around 36% of Democrats believe that Bush stole the election. How is that any different from what we're seeing now from Trump supporters? Well, first of all, the Trump supporters have been manipulated from the top down. Al Gore never claimed a stolen election. Al Gore conceded after the Supreme Court ended the recount, even as some people urged him not to. Democrats never organized to try to manipulate election results. Oops. We've skipped down here. Okay, got a pop-up that got in the way. Democrats never organized to try to manipulate election results illegally in order to counter the supposedly stolen election. A poll by CNN recently found that 59% of Republicans say that believing in Trump's claims of a stolen election is what it means to be a Republican. I mean, that's just awful. The reason Bush v. Gore undermined Democrats' confidence in the process so much was that the margin of error in the election greatly exceeded the margin of victory of the candidate. When you essentially have a tie in election and the tie-breaking rules are political bodies, and I consider the U.S. Supreme Court to be a political body, he's a law professor at that, just like the Florida Supreme Court, you're going to have some disgruntled people. But 2020 was not a close election. It was not a close election in the popular vote, not close in the Electoral College. There is no basis in reality for believing that the winner actually lost the election. So they're different in a number of ways, and you did not see the leader of a party seeking to denigrate the democratic process through false claims of stolen election hundreds, if not thousands of times. You've noted that it would be constitutional for a state like, say, Georgia to give the state legislature the power to directly appoint the state's presidential electors, but you think that's a political non-starter because the legislators who sought to do so would face the voters' wrath. How confident are you that voters would care in large enough numbers for it to matter? That's something close to where I was thinking. Oh, I think it would be huge if voters were told that they no longer could vote for president. I think that's why it has not been tried. If you poll them, voters don't like to lose their ability to vote for judges. We know this. There was an attempt back in the 2000s to get Nevada to switch from elected judges to appointed judges. Former Justice Sandra Day O'Connor even came out of retirement to do robocalls to get rid of the elected judiciary. And it lost. People didn't want to give up their right to vote for judges. They certainly wouldn't want to give up their right to vote for the most important office in the world. And that didn't get to what I was thinking. But okay, would all of this hand-wringing be just a moot point if we didn't have the Electoral College? Putting aside the merits of having states vote through an Electoral College system as opposed to a popular vote, the problem is not the Electoral College. It's how we translate the Electoral College votes into actual outcomes. First, you vote in the states, and then the vote has to be certified. Typically, that's by the governor, but in some states, there's a whole certification process with room for objection. Then the Electoral College votes have to be mailed to Congress. It's a very creaky system, which works fine when everybody abides by the norm that the winner is actually going to be the winner. But when people don't abide by those norms, then there's all this slack that could create room for chicanery and for manipulating outcomes. Why do you think voting rights hasn't been as potent a motivating issue for voters as, say, abortion? I think it's becoming an issue. I think it was an issue in the 2020 election, but it was much more of a background issue. But I think it's going to continue to be an issue as long as Trump and Trumpism are on the scene, because Trump himself made voting an election issue. You talk with a fair number of elections officials and write that they're dropping out of the field in large numbers. What effect does that have on elections? Well, let's get through it here. I think it has two negative effects. First, you're removing professionals who have experience and can withstand pressure. And new people that come in, even if they're completely well-intentioned, are more apt to make errors because they're going to be less experienced and potentially open to pressure. Second, it's possible that some of those officials are being replaced by people who do not have allegiance to the integrity of the process and would be willing to steal votes because they believe the false claims that votes were stolen from Trump. In 2020, we saw election officials refuse to bow to pressure campaigns from Trump and his associates after the vote ended. Are you confident that they would withstand that pressure again in 2024? Good question. If the same people are in place, I'm confident, but I don't think the same people are going to be in place, and that's what worries me. I don't think the people who showed integrity would lose their integrity, but I'm worried that the people who didn't show integrity might now be in positions of power. What would have happened if the election was exactly the same, except Kevin McCarthy was Speaker of the House? I don't know, but we'd have a president. Don't know we'd have a President Biden right now. I don't know what we would have. Last question and answer. So, with all that being said, how are you sleeping these days? Answer, I'm up at night with it on my mind, even in the off-season. It's the greatest political threat this country faces. I mean, we face other threats. We have climate change. We have public health threats, obviously. But in terms of our political processes, nothing comes close. Okay, so we didn't learn a great deal, although there were some interesting points and some good departure points to make some extra comments. There still are. But I thought that was a very comprehensive look at things, probably worth doing at this point. If you don't think so and you need more news, more hard news, more soft news, more soft cheese for that matter, stay tuned for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam. Here's what he's got on tap. Let's see how much we can get through. The only way we know what Manchin and Sinema's policy positions are is to follow the money. Good idea. GOP lawmakers joined the NRA in opposing the red flag rule aimed at preventing military suicides. Why would you do that? They're just crazy.
From netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
The knockdown dragout in South Dakota continues, and justice will make a stop there between the Attorney General and the Governor. Remember, they are at each other's throats. That should be interesting. And the January 6th trials are, of course, as Greg mentioned, being slowed by mounting evidence in the U.S. Capitol insurrection. From there, a tour around the world, including a stop in Latin America. Next.